Okay.
Good afternoon, Dr. Gail.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Good, thank you. Appreciate you spending some time with us as part of this online course for Hawaii. I thought we would just jump right in if you could tell us about yourself and your academic and professional experiences to get you to where you are today.
Sure. So I currently serve as the Associate Vice President for Student Life at California State University, San Marcos, which is near San Diego, California. I am new to this position in the fact that I have just finished my 4-month mark. So still in transition, but I'm definitely excited to be here. My background, especially from an education and professional perspective, is that I have pretty much existed in this realm of higher education. I did my undergrad at Northwestern University. And of course, probably like many, that's where my inspiration came to pursue a career in higher ed. I completed my master's in education from UCLA with a focus of counseling in student affairs. From there, I jumped into the work world where I worked for a collegiate honor society for a couple of years. Then I made the transition into residence life, working at the University of Connecticut, go Huskies, and both in where I focused 2 of my years, I worked in upper class housing, where it was a combination of honors housing, learning living communities, as well as our upper class students and our high profile athletes. And then my last year at UConn, I worked within a first year residential hall in an all female gender hall. So by the time I left UConn, had quite a broad amount of experience in working within residential life. From there, I enrolled at the University of Georgia for my PhD program, which was another focus of counseling and student affairs. And my doctoral internship was in housing as well. And I focused more on the assessment route as well as supporting our live-in hall director staff. And then from there, on to the University of Miami, where I had the pleasure of serving in 2 distinct roles. One was as the assistant to the Vice President for Student Affairs and the University Ombudsperson, where I focused mostly on grievances and interacting with students, from prospective students all the way to grad and professional students. And then I also served as the Executive Director of Student Life. In that time, I also had an adjunct position within our graduate school where I taught in our master's program for higher education. And the 2 classes I taught were our basic counseling skills and college student development theory.
Imagine that. So based on your experiences, it sounds like you have some housing related applications in which we could discuss this, as well as some academic, as well, having taught a full course. So no pressure for me, right?
No pressure at all.
So let's start. What is your own personal definition of college student development theory?
I consider college student development theory as truly a framework that we can tap into as we are interacting with our students, whether it is on an individual one-on-one nature or if we're dealing with students in a group setting. And so I consider it as a helpful tool as those interactions occur and you're observing and you're understanding a student's experience, that then taking and tapping into theory will help you assess a scenario and how you could potentially address it or create interventions or even programs based off of that student or the population.
Oh, thank you so much. So as a practitioner, and in your years of experience, can you provide an example in a time in which you specifically used theory to inform an intervention, a program, or some other idea that was that gravitated towards supporting students?
Right. So I think a good example is when I am working with some populations that I don't have background knowledge with. So some of our when we think of our students, we always kind of gravitate to that very traditional 18-year-old, 17-year-old student and above. But I have been in situations where I've worked with non-traditional populations. And some of my research and understanding some of those developmental theories, whether it's from a cognitive perspective or a psychosocial perspective, is just giving me a background as to what I may encounter, recognizing that, of course, all theories aren't applicable to everybody. But it's been helpful in creating those, like you said, interventions or programs to say, okay, what has the research said that the student population may be experiencing, or areas or trends that may occur, and just being aware of it as I'm trying to focus on how do I interact with the student. Is the student specifically in a particular stage where I may want to push a bit, or it may not be the appropriate time to push, and figuring that out. An example of how I've used theory, especially in program development, when I think of our leadership programs, or I think of programs where we're trying to establish community, that is extremely important. And that has been helpful because I think at some point you may ask me what my favorite theory is, but one of my theories is a transition theory. And I think that Schlossberg, I'm throwing out a name already, transition theory is one of those very helpful ones because it's not limited to a particular population. It's about the experience of transitioning. And so being able to use that and say, okay, when we have our first year students, if they're coming into the halls and they may be away for the first time, what are some of those strategies that we can create based off of what we know the theory says that students may experience?
Okay. Thank you so much. I think that's a good example. Mm-hmm. What are the assumptions or considerations that someone should keep in mind when engaging or learning about theory?
So I mentioned one previously, is the assumption that the theory applies to everyone. And that is not true. As we know, just in the nature of, or human nature, everybody is so different. Everybody has a different background, different experiences, and also different intents or motivations for being in school. And so it's recognizing that theory is, once again, a framework, but it's not going to be an apples to apples for everyone. It's not going to be a direct application to everyone. It's more the focus of, here's what research has said that could be. Okay, so I think we have to be very careful about saying the theory says this, therefore this student must be experiencing this. You know, you have to just keep in mind that you tailor. Okay. The other thing I think you have to keep in mind is not using theory speak on students. So okay. It's the idea of, Ivan, you're experiencing this, you're stage 2. And therefore, because of stage 2, this is what you need to consider. We have to be able to take some of that information and put it into regular conversational tone. Or it may be something that you don't actually share. It's just for your background knowledge to say, this is where the student is. This is where we are trying to get the student to. And I know internally this is what I'm going to do to push. The other thing that I would say is that you have to know when it's appropriate. Not every scenario is going to involve you finding a theory to match with it. Sometimes situations are just situations. And so don't get caught in the idea that there has to be a theory to practice moment. Like everything has to connect with theory. Sometimes it's just personal interactions. And so don't get lost in the idea that theory always has to be applied.
I think those are some really good pointers. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so now I, the administrator or practitioner, have devised or used theory to come up with a great idea, whether that is something related to a living learning community or some kind of program. How do I know if I did a good job or if the work I'm doing actually ties back to the idea I had to begin with?
Right. So I think that connects a bit with assessment, with the idea of assessment. And so one of the things is I think you have to understand, or what you need to determine is, how are you applying the theory? Is it the theory that you're using, is it for content, trying to share something new? Is it from a perspective of a skill building? Is it interpersonal relationships? And I think once you have a clear understanding of what that program or that intervention is going to be and what the purpose of it is, then that's how you can figure out how you can measure effectiveness or its success. So if you're talking about content, it can be your typical, what you may already be doing, a pre-post, knowledge acquisition. What did they know before? What do they know now? If you're talking from you can also look at reflection, how students or colleagues reflect on the experience that they've had. But then you can also consider observations. How do you see, and I'm thinking of potentially, if you're dealing with an RA or if you're dealing with a student assistant or any of that, how are they applying, or how do you see them in their daily work applying what they've learned? So I think that you can do it from various quantitative and qualitative ways, as well as sometimes observation is helpful.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. You had mentioned that you have previous experience teaching some courses related to student development theory.
Yes.
Thinking back on those experiences, two-part question.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the questions that you would typically be asked from your students?
Mm-hmm.
Second, overall, what would you hope that a student in that kind of course learning about student development theory would get out of their experiences learning about it?
Okay. So the question I get the most is this going to be on the test? That is always the question.
On this course.
I think in all seriousness, the biggest questions is, how do I apply this? If it was a complex, what I would consider a complex theory that may have a variety of stages or transitions or whatnot, the question was, how do I understand the full picture? Because there are so many pieces to it. And then of course it's the practitioner part, since we are an applied field. And so those were the questions that I would mostly get. And I'd add one more is taking their experiences and trying to figure out how their own either college experiences or life experiences fit within a theory. And so, so during the class, that pretty much matches what my focus was one, understanding the families of theories, the different bodies, the different philosophical backgrounds between the theories. But then also, my goal was for a student to walk away with at least 2 or 3 theories that made sense to them, that could be just a natural fit to the way that they operate, that then they can use as that framework or as a potential framework to use. Because I think when we hear theory, we get very overwhelmed because there's 7 stages, there's 10 stages, there's all these pieces. But in our daily work, or I will use I statements, in my daily work, it's not necessarily theory that's going to be the first thing that comes to mind. Some of it is we're just doing administrative work. However, when I need to tie into it or when I need to tap into it, I have that knowledge that will instantly come up to say, that's what I'm seeing. And that's what I want my students to walk away with, saying, okay, I can recognize this. Or if I don't recognize it, I know I can figure out what it is, and I know what resources I have to tap into. And the thing is that because we see everything from students figuring out their identity and who they are to career-based theories of what they're going to do in the future, to, who am I now? Or how does this environment influence me? It crosses the spectrum. So
yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that answer, especially the part of walking away with just maybe 2 theories really resonate with you. There's just so much out there. If you walk away with just that, I think that would really enhance your understanding of the student experience.
Very true. And what you'll see is as you start to look at theories, they're not that different. Each family of theories started with a foundation, and often the research that you see from it has built upon that initial theory. So the construction of the theory may have been based off of one particular population in a particular area of the country, but as we've evolved and as our students have evolved, then other researchers have said, well, how does this theory look like with this population? So once you have that foundation, you'll see the different nuances if it's being applied to a particular area. And once you have that, then it's easier. It's like all of our ethnic identities, they're very similar. When you look at our integrative theories, self-authorship and those, they're very similar. They have the similar backgrounds, similar backgrounds. So once you know it, then it's pretty easy to tap into.
So in this course, we could only cover so much within a limited amount of time.
Yes.
I'm curious if you have any recommended resources or practices that participants should do if they want to learn more about theories or their applications on their own time.
Right. Well, I think that one thing is important is to tap into the profession's competency areas, because depending on who a person is coming in and the type of work that they do, some of our associations have varying guidelines of what you should know. This is your entry-level knowledge, and this provides a guideline of what would be important for you to know in order to, I would say, in air quotes, be successful in managing a student service. And so I think that that's a great foundation. And then there are always, of course, with the internet, and of course with publications, there are always going to be ways to get those foundational theories, to get that information. But I think what's always important is, depending on the functional area, especially if you're thinking of housing, so from an assignments perspective, or from a facilities perspective, or even from a residence education perspective, there are going to be ways or articles that show application. So for example, if I think of from a facilities perspective, you may be looking more at environmental theories about how students are using the space, what are things to consider, how does that impact the experience that you're providing for the student. From an assignments perspective, you're really talking about interpersonal interactions. And so, you're seeing when that first year student and the roommate may have those conflicts. Some of those may be because they're in different areas of their own identity development or transition. So I think that those are ways, resources that you can tap into, because there's always some form of connection that's been written up between theory and a particular area. So you can get that focused and find that. And the library, there's these books. And the other thing is, I would say any of your student affairs professionals who have gone through programs, or any higher ed administration program graduates, they all have these big, thick books that are probably sitting on their bookshelves. So you can always jump in there, grab a book, or even talk to them as well to say, this is what I may be encountering. What do you think? Or what areas would I consider?
All right. You mentioned something. I think that's a wonderful response. Think of connecting it back to a kuhuai. There is a set of competencies associated for housing professionals. So the light bulb went off in my head, because there is a document that we use not just within my department, but it is provided by a kuhuai that basically says, if you want to do right by students as far as their development, pay attention to this. So that's a wonderful resource. I think you unintentionally kind of just nudged there.
Maybe it was intentional.
And then also other things like
I insert things here and there.
Well done. Well done. Other things like the Talking Stick or some other just magazines that we have in the profession, I think are also helpful. So, Dr. We're out of time.
Oh, okay. Well, I appreciate it.
Time flies when you're learning.
It is. And when you're talking about exciting things like this, I will say, if I can just put one thing.
Absolutely.
One of my favorite theories that I think kind of is applicable to any student is the Baxter Magolta's Journey to Self-Authorship. And I think that is one that is really talks about us as professionals, regardless of what role we are in, but one where we serve as what is considered to be good company as a student is truly conceptualizing what they want to be, and they're defining and constructing what type of role and they want in the world and who they're going to be. And we often see that happening, especially once we get to our upper class students. So when we're thinking of our student employees, if you may be working with them, or our upper class students, I think that's always a good one to have in the back pocket that to me makes sense and I think can be applied across the board.
That's good. Excellent. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Referral. So once again, thank you so much for your time. I enjoyed and learned by this interview, so I can't thank you enough.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Of course.